The story begins with John Carter, once a deeply devout man, sitting alone in his dimly lit apartment. The room is sparse, a testament to his current state of disconnection from the world. A dusty Bible rests on the shelf, untouched for years. He gazes out the window, his expression hollow, as he reflects on his life. "I prayed every day," John murmurs to himself. "For my wife, for a miracle, and nothing happened." John's wife, Emily, had passed away from cancer 5 years earlier. Her illness had been the crucible that shattered his faith. Despite endless prayers, fasting, and begging for divine intervention, Emily had slipped away, leaving John consumed with anger and betrayal. Since then, he had drifted through life, avoiding the church, his old friends, and anything that reminded him of the hope he once held. John reluctantly attends his niece's baptism at his sister's insistence. He sits in the back of the crowded church, arms crossed, his discomfort evident. The joyful atmosphere around him feels foreign and almost mocking. During the ceremony, he overhears a conversation between two elderly parishioners sitting nearby. "Did you hear about the chapel up north? They say miracles happen there." "Oh yes," one replies. "A woman who couldn't walk for years left her wheelchair behind. A man's lost son came home the very next day. It's like God himself listens more closely there." John scoffs under his breath. Miracles. If God didn't bother saving Emily, why would he help anyone else? That night, John can't shake the words he overheard. Something about the way the women spoke, so full of conviction, grates at him. Against his better judgment, he looks up the location of the chapel on his phone. It's a modest remote place called St. Augustine's, nestled in the countryside several hours away. John reasons with himself, maybe this will finally prove that faith is nothing but empty promises. Or maybe it'll just get everyone off my back about finding peace. The next morning, John packs a small bag and sets out for the chapel, his emotions a volatile mix of skepticism, bitterness, and faint curiosity. As he drives through winding roads and past sprawling fields, his memories of Emily resurface, their wedding day, her laughter, her final moments. Guilt creeps in. Deep down, he wonders if he had failed her by losing faith. When John finally arrives at St. Augustine's, he's underwhelmed. The chapel is small, almost shabby, with peeling paint and overgrown ivy. A handful of people linger outside, their expressions hopeful and serene. Inside, the air smells of incense and candles, and a peaceful stillness seems to envelop the space. An elderly woman named Grace, the chapel's caretaker, approaches him with a warm smile. "Welcome," she says softly. "Here, everyone finds what they need." John raises an eyebrow. "And what if I don't believe in all this miracle nonsense?" Grace's smile doesn't falter. "Then perhaps you'll find something even better." John stays in the back pew, observing. He sees a young woman lighting a candle, tears streaming down her face as she clutches a rosary. An elderly couple kneels together, their hands clasped tightly. Despite his cynicism, John feels an inexplicable pull, an urge to stay just a little longer. Over the next 2 days, John watches as other visitors claim to experience miraculous moments. A man with chronic pain suddenly stands without assistance. A grieving mother feels an unexplainable peace. These stories only frustrate him further. Why should these strangers receive miracles when his own pleas were ignored? "I knew this was all a waste of time," he mutters to himself, standing outside the chapel on his third evening. The night is cool and stars dot the sky. He's ready to leave when he notices a young boy sitting on the steps, his head bowed in prayer. The boy can't be older than 10, his hands clasped tightly as he whispers to the heavens. "What are you praying for?" John asks, his voice tinged with curiosity despite himself. The boy looks up, his eyes bright but filled with worry. "My mom, she's in the hospital. The doctors say she might not wake up, but I know she will. God listens here." The boy's faith is unshakable, pure. It stirs something in John, a faint echo of the man he used to be. As John watches the boy, he feels an unexpected pang of emotion, but he quickly shakes it off. "Good luck, kid," he says, turning toward his car. But as he takes a step, a gust of wind carries the faint sound of bells ringing from the chapel, a sound he hasn't heard all week. John glances back at the boy, then at the chapel, uncertainty flickering across his face. Something compels him to stay one more night. Against all logic, he turns back toward the chapel door, taking a deep breath as he steps inside. The faint echo of the bells lingers in his ears, and for the first time in years, John dares to hope. The chapel is empty when John steps inside, save for the flickering candles casting soft shadows on the walls. The air feels heavier tonight, charged with something he can't explain. He moves to the front pew, sits down, and stares at the altar. His hands rest on his knees, fidgeting as his emotions churn. "You're waiting for something." Grace's voice startles him. She's standing nearby, her expression kind but knowing. She sits beside him, her presence calm yet unwavering. "I don't know why I'm here," John admits after a long silence. "I've seen enough to know that miracles don't happen for people like me." Grace tilts her head. "People like you? Who are they?" People who prayed, begged, and still watched the person they love most slip away, John says bitterly. Emily deserved better, and I thought if I prayed hard enough, I could save her. But nothing happened. So, don't talk to me about faith. Grace's smile falters for the first time, but her eyes remain steady. Sometimes the answer to our prayers isn't what we expect. Sometimes it's something we're not ready to understand. But faith isn't about guarantees. It's about trusting even when we don't get what we ask for. Her words hit a nerve, and John stands abruptly. That's a nice sentiment, but it doesn't change anything. Emily's gone. No miracle is bringing her back. Grace doesn't argue. Instead, she places a hand on his shoulder. The answers you're looking for might be closer than you think. Stay a little longer. You might hear them. The next morning, John finds the boy from the night before sitting on the chapel steps again, his small frame hunched in concentration as he writes in a notebook. "Still here, huh?" John asks, unable to resist the urge to approach. The boy looks up, smiling faintly. "Yeah, Mom's surgery is today. I'm just writing her a letter for when she wakes up." John's chest tightens. "You seem pretty sure that she'll wake up." "She will," the boy says firmly. "God's listening. I know he is." John doesn't have the heart to argue. Instead, he sits beside the boy, silence stretching between them. "What if she doesn't?" he finally asks, the words heavy. The boy looks up, his face solemn. "Then I'll keep praying. Sometimes we don't get what we want right away, but God doesn't forget us." John can't respond. He watches the boy for a while, something shifting deep within him. Later that evening, John finds himself alone in the chapel again. He kneels for the first time in years, his hands clasped tightly together. "Emily," he whispers, "if you can hear me, I need a sign. Anything." The silence is deafening. He's about to give up when a soft breeze brushes against his face, and the smell of her favorite flowers, lavender, fills the air. He freezes, looking around. There are no flowers in the chapel, no open windows for the breeze to come through. "Emily," he whispers again, his voice trembling. He feels a warmth in his chest, a fleeting comfort that he hasn't felt in years. Tears spill down his cheeks as he sinks back into the pew, overwhelmed by the experience. The next day, John sees the boy running toward the chapel, his face glowing with joy. "She's awake!" the boy shouts. "The doctor said it was impossible, but she woke up!" John's breath catches in his throat. He watches as the boy falls to his knees on the chapel steps, his hands raised in gratitude. It's impossible to ignore the raw power of the moment, but John can't bring himself to feel joy. Instead, he feels anger. Why did this boy get his miracle when Emily didn't? Why did God choose to answer this prayer but ignore his? He storms into the chapel, his emotions boiling over. "Why?" he shouts at the empty space. "Why do some people get miracles and others don't? What kind of God does that?" Grace appears in the doorway, her face calm but filled with concern. "It's not about who gets what," she says gently. "It's about seeing the miracles we don't always recognize." John shakes his head, tears streaming down his face. "I just want to know why I wasn't enough for her, why my faith wasn't enough." Grace steps closer, placing a hand on his arm. "Maybe you were enough in ways you don't understand yet. Maybe Emily's miracle wasn't about what you lost, but what you still have to find." John collapses onto the pew, his anger giving way to sorrow. For the first time, he allows himself to grieve fully, the pain pouring out in waves. Grace stays beside him, silent and steady, as he begins to release the burden he's carried for so long. As John leaves the chapel that evening, he notices something written on a small piece of paper, tucked under the Bible he left untouched earlier. He unfolds it, his heart racing. The message is simple. "I'm proud of you. Keep going." John stands frozen in the chapel, staring at the note. His rational mind wrestles with what he's holding. It looks and feels like Emily's handwriting, down to the way her G loops elegantly at the bottom. He runs his fingers over the paper, as if expecting it to dissolve. Grace finds John sitting outside the chapel, the note clutched in his hand. His face is pale, his eyes wide. "Did you put this there?" he asks, his voice shaking. She kneels in front of him, her expression soft but unreadable. "What does it say?" John hesitates before handing her the note. Grace studies it, her brow furrowing. "This isn't from me, John." "Then who?" he demands. His voice grows louder, panic bubbling beneath the surface. "You said God doesn't forget us. Is this supposed to be him talking, or—" He stops himself, afraid to speak the other possibility aloud. "This is cruel, Grace. If this is some kind of test, I can't handle it." Grace places her hand gently on his arm. "Sometimes the answers we seek come in ways we don't expect. Have you thought that maybe Emily never left you? Maybe she's still guiding you, even now?" John shakes his head, his emotions a tangled mess of anger and hope. "I don't believe in that. I can't." "Then what do you believe in, John?" Grace asks, her tone firm but kind. "Because something brought you back here. Something made you open your heart again, even if just a little." That night, John dreams of Emily for the first time in years. She's sitting in their garden, bathed in warm sunlight. She turns to him, her face serene. "You're stronger than you think," she says softly. "Keep going." When he wakes, he feels an odd mix of peace and confusion. He can't shake the dream or the note, and he finds himself drawn back to the chapel. There, he meets the boy again, who's lighting a candle for his mother. "I knew she'd be okay," the boy says simply when John approaches. John studies him. "How did you know?" The boy shrugs as if the answer is obvious. "I just trust. Sometimes when you trust, you can feel it, like someone's watching out for you." John swallows hard, his throat tight. What if you lose the person you're trusting for? The boy tilts his head, thoughtful. Maybe they're still there, just in a different way. That evening, John decides to sit in the chapel longer than usual, hoping for clarity. As the hours pass, the air around him grows still, almost too quiet. A woman enters, her figure unfamiliar, but strangely comforting. She's dressed in simple clothes, her presence warm but commanding. "You've been waiting for answers," she says, her voice soft but steady. "But answers don't always come the way we expect." John's heart pounds. "Who are you?" The woman doesn't answer directly. Instead, she gestures to the altar. "You think your prayers went unheard, but they didn't. Sometimes miracles aren't about saving someone. Sometimes they're about saving what they left behind." John's eyes well with tears as he stares at her. "Emily?" The woman smiles faintly, her expression unreadable. "You already know the answer, John. But the real question is, what will you do with what you found?" Before he can respond, she turns and walks toward the door. By the time he gathers the courage to follow, she's gone, leaving him alone with his thoughts, and the growing certainty that she was real. John returns to the pew where he sat earlier and finds another note, this one more weathered than the last. It reads, "You'll find me where the garden grows." He clutches the note tightly, his mind racing. The garden, their garden. For the first time since Emily's death, he feels a pull to go back to the house he's avoided for years. As he steps out of the chapel into the cool night, a single thought anchors him. Maybe this isn't the end of his faith, but the beginning of something deeper. John stands outside the chapel, the second note gripped tightly in his hand. The words, "You'll find me where the garden grows," echo in his mind. He hasn't been back to his old house since Emily passed, avoiding it like a wound that refused to heal. Now, it feels like the house is calling him, like she is calling him. The drive back to the house is both agonizing and cathartic. Memories flash before him. Emily laughing as she tended the flowers, the quiet evenings they spent on the porch, the night they planted the garden together. By the time he pulls into the driveway, he's trembling. The house feels frozen in time, as though it's been waiting for him. Dust covers the surfaces and the faint smell of roses lingers in the air, even though the garden has long been neglected. John steps outside, the cool night air brushing his face. The garden is overgrown, weeds swallowing what used to be Emily's pride and joy. Yet, beneath the chaos, he notices something odd. A small patch of soil has been freshly turned. John approaches the disturbed soil cautiously, his heart racing. He drops to his knees and begins digging with his hands, the earth cold and damp against his fingers. After a few moments, his hands hit something solid, a small metal box. He pulls it out, his breath catching as he recognizes it. It's the keepsake box Emily used to keep mementos in. Photos, letters, little treasures that held meaning for her. With trembling hands, he opens the box. Inside are faded photographs of them together, pressed flowers from their garden, and a letter addressed to him. The sight of Emily's handwriting makes his chest tighten. The letter reads, "My dearest John, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer by your side, at least not in the way you're used to. But I'm still here, in the memories we made, in the love we shared, and in the life you're meant to keep living. This garden was always my sanctuary, and I hope it can be yours now too. Take care of it, John. Let it grow again. And in doing so, let yourself heal. Love doesn't end. It transforms. And neither do we. Forever yours, Emily." John clutches the letter to his chest, tears streaming down his face. For the first time in years, the weight of grief begins to lift, replaced by something he thought he'd lost entirely. Hope. In the days that follow, John throws himself into restoring the garden. He clears the weeds, replants flowers, and nurtures the soil back to life. Each bloom feels like a small victory, a testament to Emily's enduring presence in his life. Word spreads through the town about John's transformation. Grace visits often, her gentle encouragement helping him through the tough days. The boy from the chapel even stops by, helping John plant sunflowers, Emily's favorite. "She'd like this," the boy says with a knowing smile.